This video is part 2 of a two-part series. If you have not seen part 1, stop and go back and watch it now. Some steps have been removed in this video because they were already completed in part 1. This video is going to be the removal and replacement of the new battery cable. Over the years, the factory battery cables have been upgraded and now have a new part number. This part number is YS4Z14301JB. This is how the battery cable comes from the dealership. I was very disappointed in the quality of the parts that Ford is now selling. As you can see in these pictures, there are exposed wires all over the cables. I will address this issue later in the video. My cost for this part was $121.10 from a Ford dealership. I have since found them cheaper online since I now have the correct part number. I first started by removing the negative ground cable from the body located directly underneath the airbox location. I then used a wire brush to prep the surface for the new cable, making sure that there was no debris on the surface. Here are a few pictures of what the positive cable looked like from the EGR tube heat. This is the point that was contacting the engine and causing the vehicle to stall. Alright, so looking at the wiring harness, you have your negative wire here and your positive wire, and then it all leads together as it goes down the system. This part is going to go towards your starter. It's going to attach to the starter, and then this wire goes to the alternator. This is going to be a 10 millimeter at the alternator. So I am going to remove that first, and I'll show you pictures of exactly where this is located, but it's directly above the oil filter at the back side of your engine. And it's going to be a 10 millimeter, like I said. Now, one thing that did get me a little frustrated was when I bought this wiring kit, you've got these studs there, but no nuts. If you have the older, outdated wiring harness on your vehicle, you're going to have to go buy more nuts and washers for it. I got 6 millimeter nuts, washers, and a lock washer to help solve this problem. The positive cable on the alternator is easily accessible from the bottom of the vehicle. It is located just above the oil filter on the passenger side of the vehicle. Be gentle with this nut because it is attached to a plastic piece that has gone through a lot of heat cycles and can easily break. Alright, so while I was removing the alternator positive battery cable, the bracket actually broke off of the alternator, and I was left with this piece here. Now, initially I thought I was going to have to buy a new alternator, which was going to cost around $200 and set me back even further. So I started the process of taking out the alternator, which there are a lot of good helpful videos on YouTube of how to do this. It's very simple. And I realized that there's a possibility that I could remove this bracket and the bolt be the same thread size as the positive battery cable, which has plenty of extra cable attached to it. So all I did was I removed the alternator out so I could turn it sideways to remove that plastic piece that I broke, and I was left with this thread right here. Now that thread ended up being the exact same size as the positive battery cable. So instead of having to spend $200 to replace my alternator, all I have to do is attach it to that bracket right there. Next, I moved down to the starter to remove the two cables attached to it. The starter is located in the center of the vehicle just to the left of the oil filter. I found it easier to remove the starter to get the wires off. There are 2 bolts facing the passenger side and 1 on the driver's side. Also, when putting the new cables on, you want to start with the starter. It will give you a lot more flexibility to get both nuts onto the starter. This can be difficult if the rest of the cables are already attached. Once you have disconnected the alternator and starter wires, you can move back up to the top of the engine to remove the rest of the battery cable. With the cable out, we can now see how dangerous our vehicle actually was with the wire completely exposed and partially broken. Here I am comparing the two cables to make sure that they are the same. You can clearly see the updates that Ford has done to try to improve this wire. Now that I have verified that the new part will work, it's time to route the wire down inside the engine compartment. This is not as easy as I thought that it would be because there are a lot of hoses and wires to route through. I left the wires loose on top and went back under the vehicle to finish the installation. With the battery cables bolted to the starter, I reinstalled it back into the engine. I then moved over to attach the alternator positive cable. This is what the cable now looks like with the plastic piece that broke off removed. I personally like it this way better than the way it came from the factory. Back up top, I noticed a cable that needed to have the terminal replaced because the wires were showing from heat exposure. These cables were coming out of the main vehicle wiring harness. I cut the wires back, added a section of heat shrink tubing to it, and then I crimped a new terminal on. I followed that up by using my cobalt heat gun to shrink the heat shrink tight around the wires before I reinstalled it. Next, I installed the bolt for the negative body ground cable onto the prepared surface from earlier in the video. I then started to address the exposed wires on the new battery cable. I used electrical tape to wrap the wire, followed by heat shrink tubing on top of the electrical tape to secure and protect the wire. I used heat shrink wherever it was possible to get it on to seal the wires. What's next is to install the battery box, install the battery, clean the battery terminals, install the battery hold down, and connect all the negative wires before moving on to the positive side. Because this is a new design for the battery cables, the routing is going to be a little bit different. The positive terminal is going to be placed at a 45-degree angle to the battery. Because of this, the orange positive cap cover is no longer going to work. Next, you want to reinstall the air hose going into the bottom of the airbox. This can be a little bit tricky, but with a little bit of effort, it'll fit. Next, you want to reinstall the air filter box. I quickly realized that my wire routing was not at the correct angle that I needed to get the airbox into position. So I loosened up the positive cable, repositioned it, and put the airbox in, and then tightened it back down into its final position. Next, I installed the air filter and placed the airbox lid on top with the intake hose attached to it. I then tightened everything down. The last step you're going to need to do is place the battery cover on top of the battery and start the vehicle. If the vehicle starts, you did a good job. I want to take this time to thank you guys for watching this video. I hope that this video was helpful to you guys. And if you liked it and it helped you out, give me a thumbs up and subscribe below for more projects with this vehicle coming up. Thanks for watching.